But the second topic we wanted to touch on is the one of mergers and acquisitions. And on that topic, I'd like to start back to you, Deborah, because I think we've all seen an incredible number of deals in the water sector happening in the last 2 years. 2021 was really big on mergers and acquisitions. Multiple acquirers are very active, and the multiples that they're willing to pay are as high as they have ever been, right? So I guess could you comment on that? Do you know why this is happening? Is it mostly positive for the water sector as a whole, or not? What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess the positive side depends on whether you're the buyer or the seller, right? High multiples are nice for sellers, at least until they have to live up to the expectations that are created by high multiples. I think the reason for it is pretty simple. We'd have a tremendous amount of capital chasing still a fairly small and fragmented sector on the private water side. So there is, because of some of the things we just talked about in terms of the big drivers, there's a lot of interest. There's limited deals to be done. So there's a lot of capital chasing these deals. And I think overall that's positive. The risk, of course, comes around whether expectations become too high. This has been a long history in the water industry where people think things can change faster than they sometimes do. And so then people get disappointed because it takes longer for technologies to be adopted or longer for change to happen in terms of spending. I think we're in a really interesting period right now where it actually looks to me, for perhaps the first time in my career, that the water industry may be living up to this because there's a lot of money to be spent on upgrading infrastructure. I think we'll talk more about that. And there's also a lot of new interest around innovation. So it appears to me that the interest and the investor support for the sector is likely to be mostly positive. There's always some that don't quite live up to what they were supposed to, but for the most part, I think we're in a good place.
We'll certainly try to live up to the expectations. Thank you, Deborah. So, and it kind of dives good for a question to you, Tom. There's some technology based company have seen some extraordinary exits in the last few years. And I don't know if it's just me, and please comment on that, but a lot of them seem to have something to do with membranes, right? A long time ago there was Xenon, then there was Nano H2O in California, Desalitec lately, Oxymem, NX Filtration in the Netherlands. A lot of these companies are also have something to do with membranes. Can you comment on kind of what's so special about membrane technology? Why is it attracting the attention of such high valuations by investors?
Sure. And first of all, the companies that you mentioned are certainly all have a membrane component to them, or are in some cases strictly membrane companies. But each of those examples is somewhat unique. I mean, each one there was a particular gap in the technical portfolio that was filled, or it had something to do with the timing, market conditions. But they really show the importance of membranes to a technical portfolio for anybody in the water or wastewater sector. Historically, water treatment was a time-consuming and a very space-intensive process. It required large mechanical systems and operators at every step of the way, and it used gravity. I mean, gravity was the predominant force to separate the particulates from the water. That's why we see the big round tanks at all the water plants that we're also familiar with. But those big tanks have been going away in large part. Now the common denominator in the company that you mentioned was membranes, and that's because and membranes are so important in reuse and in water treatment in general because they provide a high rate treatment option. They're an absolute barrier. They prevent the passage of any particulate that does not meet the criteria of that particular membrane. So you stop it dead in its tracks. In a clarifier, There are some particles that won't settle. In a sand filter, once you fill up all the little spaces between the sand grains with particulates, ultimately you have breakthrough. And that's when it signals that you have to backwash the filter. With a membrane, you measure the pressure on each side of the membrane, and you clean it or change it depending on the change in pressure. So you don't have to wait for hours for particles to settle. You're sure that they're not going to get through, and that's where the the real-time analytics I mentioned before comes into play. With newer digital technologies, we're better able to monitor what's going on and give us an indication if there's a problem with the membrane. What ensured the high valuations of all the companies you mentioned was something else that's very important to an OE or a supplier. And that is that all of them had a membrane or a membrane process that was proprietary and specifiable. It wasn't another Me Too product. Many membrane companies, but they're not all in many membranes. They're not all created equal. And in the case of each of the companies that you mentioned that exited with these high multiples, they not only filled a gap in the portfolio, but they had something that allowed the company to get its foot in the door and bring along other technologies that it may have had. It was specifiable and it was proprietary.
Yeah, good. Well, so it sounds like it's essentially treats faster, less footprint, and better water quality. So is it fair to say that a water treatment plant of the future, it's hard to envision one without membranes in 30 to 40 years from now? Essentially, all water utilities will have some form of membrane treatment in it, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. And in fact, another treatment process that we've all heard about or grown up with is lime softening, where you add lime to precipitate the hardness. Common for all sorts of water plants. You can remove that hardness now with a membrane using nanofiltration. So there's really a membrane for almost every application, or can be used in conjunction with any other process.
By the way, it's music to
no
my
contaminants.
That's what I heard, 20 years ago when I founded the H2O Innovation. So it makes me really happy to hear it now 22 years later.
All right, and if we continue with a question on the strategy related to M&A, I think Bill, for you, the water sector, the water industry is highly fragmented market. The largest player, Veolia, which recently acquired another giant, Suez, does not even represent 3% of the global water market. That's estimated roughly at 900 billion, give or take. Mm-hmm. And you often advise clients on M&A transactions, right? Probably. Some are highly successful, some probably less successful. So if you would like to share a little bit of your secrets, what are the special talents and that your clients that are the successful ones, what do they have in common? Or in other words, what are the key recommendations to succeed in a roll-up strategy to consolidate a water player?
Well, surprisingly enough, one of the keys to success for a water roll-up strategy is to have an actual strategy. And you would think that would always be the case, but failure often comes in these cases from taking a ready, fire, aim approach, where companies are bought without necessarily having thought through what is it that we want to achieve and what that we want to acquire. So we recommend that you really kind of look at what is it that you as a company want to achieve. Are you looking to fill a hole in your portfolio, like Tom referenced? Are you looking to obtain more recurring revenue so that you have a base and take spikiness out of your business portfolio? Are you looking to go into new geographies or add services? So that's kind of the first thing, what you want to achieve, and then how attractive really are those segments, and how doable is it? Are there actionable targets there? And how well do you expect to be able to integrate those into your existing operations? We've actually seen clients who obviously I'm not going to name, who wanted to go out and do a scan and identify targets. And then after going back to their board to talk about it, they said, that's all really great, but what do you want to acquire them for? And they had no real answer because there had not been a strategy put in place to what they wanted to achieve by doing these deals. So I think going out and doing all the work up front, knowing why you want to do it and how, and then going through that's the key, because executing a bad deal well is not successful M&A.
Yeah. Well said. So, Fred, I mean, it's known to our audience that H2O likes to acquire companies, right? You have actually quite a track record, and it's also clearly part of your 3-year plan that was published lately. How would you describe yourself and H2O Innovation as an acquirer?
Well, first and foremost, I think we are a discipline acquired. To your point, Bill, coming up with a strategy that is clear and out there on what you're looking for will dictate at the end, how much you're ready to pay for it. So I think through the years, we have been very disciplined in going after specific targets and specific transaction size as well. We have been also very disciplined in integrating them. I mean, buying an asset, buying a company is one thing. I mean, but it's only the beginning, right? It's day zero. The real adventure and the real challenges come after. How are you going to integrate? How are you going to retain your talent and your people, particularly these days when we know it's such a challenging and difficult labor market? So for us, we will continue to do what we have done in the past, which is essentially try to focus in growing our existing distribution of specialty products platform we have created. So right now we have more than 150 distributors, where we think that we could add more in terms of technology and components to that. We're going also to look, to your point, Tom, for complementary technologies to membranes or in the line of membrane filtration, because it is key. It is our in DNA. This is what we have been doing and growing our membrane expertise, the membrane platforms, and this is what we're trying to serve. And this is what we're going to do. Now, again, we want to stay disciplined on the multiple we're going after. We're trying to pursue opportunities also on things that might be a little bit under the radar. So not necessarily in line with what the large bankers and large firms are looking at. So this will eliminate some of the competitors we may see coming up on transactions. But on the good news for the water industry is that there is tremendous appetite for water transactions. I mean, now private equities, funds, infrastructure funds, and other strategic buyers like us, are definitely in line now to look for companies to acquire.